All right, so this is round two of the tournament with Justin as white versus Jeff as black. I think this is definitely one of those games where we obviously would like to see it go a lot longer. It ended pretty early, ended on move 16 with checkmate. I think we were all expecting it to go longer too, and frankly, I think the general assumption would be that Jeff goes into this with an advantage. But things get missed, and actually, I have a funny story about that. But anyways, we'll get into it. So, names of which Larson, which is 1B3, basically saying, like, okay, yes, I'm not going to get control of the center, but I'm going to get great development in there, and it's not clear what black needs to do. Um, Theoretically, the engine says, like, it's equal from move one, which isn't what you'd want to see, but that doesn't really matter, and this is played at the top levels all the time. So, going into it, one thing that we'll notice is that, I'm just going to skip forward a little bit, looking at all these moves, and we'll talk about why that's a blunder. Jeff did a better job developing his pieces. So, he's got three of his pieces into the game. He's castled. This bishop doesn't have amazing squares, but maybe you can move the pawn up and get it over here and then get it on this diagonal, which has a lot of potential. After the pawn gets moved forward, the knight has a lot of springing attacking moves where there could be a discovery attack on the rook. And it basically seems very easy and natural. He's got this great center. His bishop's got a lot of freedom to move about. His knights aren't really in danger because he can kind of close up the king side here. So this is, by all accounts, I think a really good position for black. The engine gives an evaluation of 8.1 in black's favor, but that's because of a very specific tactic. So if you miss the tactic, it's more like a 1 point evaluation in black's favor, which is pretty good, even with this, which is technically a mistake, but it's not that big of a deal. What probably should have happened is starting around here, Justin started doing a couple pawn moves that didn't really accomplish anything, and you really should focus on getting your pieces out. So here's kind of just, if you follow more or less the top lines the engine recommends, you end up with a position that's more or less like this. So, black's pieces are out kind of in the same way and really good advantage. White's pieces are out, and things are going to go pretty normal. You move here, you get the bishop out, you castle, white castles, and everyone's equal and everyone's fine and everyone's happy. But instead, unfortunately, a lot of those moves kind of got spent on all these pawn moves, which didn't really get the pieces into the game. So you end up having Jeff with an advantage pretty early on. So this is a very interesting sequence that Jeff misses the attack and he's just focused on development here. But it's actually a super interesting sequence because you wind up in a situation where you can take here and you can't take back because it falls victim to this checkmate. So you get in a situation where black's going to win at least a free pawn. Engine says the best move at this point is to move your knight up, and this does two things. It prevents the bishop going here being a checkmate sequence, partially because you can take, but also because, more importantly, you have this escape square. And then even after that, there's a whole complicated sequence, which basically means, okay, you're going to lose the rook because basically at this point you have this attack on the rook and the queen's defended because of the knight. So it's not pretty. You lose a piece here. It actually recommends the best move at this point for white is at b4, which is just outrageous. So not like a real move here. The engine's just saying you got to do something. So that doesn't work. Instead, both of them missed it, and this move does avoid the situation because after here takes, bishop goes here, you can just move out of the way. And so white's winning in this situation, and it's no longer a free pawn. So that doesn't happen. Both sides just continue their development. Things move on. This is where Jeff moves back here instead of here. I would even think about here as a move, but you can't because of the queen. So it'd be nice to be able to, put your knight up here and then just kind of block everything up, but you just can't. So it seems more natural to move here, even though the engine doesn't love it. But okay, here was kind of the pivotal part of the game where things kind of fell apart. As far as the engine concerned, basically equal. And I was talking to Chris actually during the game, and he was like, Queen H5 is not that good. And I think it's so easy to miss something that Jeff missed it as well. And so did Chris, and I would have missed it under similar circumstances. Is I was saying, what are you going to do about the threat of after you stop the mate and you push the pawn up? What are you going to do about queen h6? And he was like, I don't really know what the problem is supposed to be with queen h6. If I can eventually get my knight, onto this square, get rid of the pawn, put my knight here, queen's going to have, no place to go. But of course, the threat basically here is the bishop. So this is a really crazy part of the game where things could have gone either way. The blunder that he committed, we'll come back to that in a second. So here's a possible sequence. The best move is, not the best move, but one of the more, I think, reasonable moves is f6, because at this point, it's like, what are you supposed to do? The attack's faded. You take with the bishop. It's just going to get taken back with the knight. You're going to win a pawn. So that's not so bad. You take that with this. This seems completely fine. It actually leads to an interesting sequence here. What is very interesting is that you get to, this move right here. This is the engine recommended move that, I'm going to close this out. This is the engine recommended move that shuts it all down. It stops this checkmate and the diagonal, and it actually leads to a very interesting continuation where white, if they're not really careful, can get just like demolished here. So you put the knight right here and you start thinking to yourself, what's an obvious move to push the knight out of the way? Well, I'll move the pawn over here. This is a huge blunder. And actually the best engine move right here is to take the pawn with the bishop, just giving up the knight. And this is kind of a little crazy, but see if you can take a minute, pause the video here, I'll give like 5 seconds, see if you can find the continuation for black. That's awesome. And the worst one for white. It's actually a brilliant move, which would have been really cool to see in the game. The important part is this knight here, you might think, haha, I'm winning. The only problem is you got e5 right here, which shuts it down. But also, if you're not careful and you don't take that, basically the threat you're going to have to deal with is black doesn't even have to take black, and black shouldn't take back because you have a way better move, which is bishop check here. And while it may not appear so at first, the queen is completely trapped. This square, you can't go here. You can't take here because of the queen. And there's no like pawn captures in time to make anything happen. So if white's not careful, you can actually lose the queen here. But Jeff has to spot a pretty exciting move, which would be really cool if we'd seen it. But unfortunately, none of that happens. We get here to queen h6. He doesn't see the threat. He takes the pawn early, which, you can see the threats here, but unfortunately the bishop was opened. Jeff didn't see it, and mate was delivered.